SAP just admitted per seat pricing is over. Not we're exploring options, not we're excited to announce a journey. The CEO went on Bloomberg and said, more or less in these words, that pricing models which built the company doesn't make sense anymore. No workshop, no rebrand, just the quiet sound of a 20-year-old business model hitting a wall. That's today's SaaS autopsy episode in a nutshell. If you're new here, welcome to SaaS Evolved, where we track the future of software as it gets rebuilt around AI. Pricing is collapsing, agents are replacing entire workflows, categories that felt permanent a year ago are being redrawn in real time, and most of the industry hasn't caught up to what that actually means yet. Most people covering this are chasing the headline. We're after the structural signal underneath it. The shift before it's obvious, not the recap after it's already old news. Because by the time something's a headline, it's already happened to somebody. We'd rather catch it while it's still a choice. So if you build, run, or invest in software, this is where you see it coming before it shows up in your board deck. So if you haven't hit subscribe yet, now is a good time. And let's get into it. Let's start with why SAP is saying this part out loud instead of quietly changing it into the fine print like everybody else is doing. Because this isn't a strategy memo, it's a company under real pressure, doing something about it in public, which is rarer than it sounds. Here's the number that matters. SAP has lost about a fifth of its market value this year. Not a bad quarter, a fifth of the company gone. Because investors are asking exactly the question your board is probably asking right now. Does a legacy SaaS model actually survive the AI shift? Or are we just watching a slower version of the same ending? Now, to his credit, Christian Klein didn't sit there and wait to find out. On March 18th, he went on Bloomberg and said the quiet part out loud. SAP is scrapping subscription pricing in favor of AI consumption pricing. Full stop. That's not a feature update buried in release notes. That's the biggest change to how SAP makes money since it moved to the cloud. And SAP doesn't do big change lightly. This is a company that's been around since before most of its customers were born. So before we get into what SAP actually is doing about it, the org changes, the acquisition, all of it, let's talk about why the old model was doomed in the first place. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's simpler than it sounds. So let's talk about why per seat pricing breaks under agents. So stick with me here because it's genuinely not complicated. It just took the entire software industry 20 years to notice. Step one, SAP's pricing has always been tied to humans logging in. More people, more seats, more revenue. That's not an SAP thing. That's every SaaS company that's ever existed. It's the most boring, reliable math and software. You hire, you expand, you pay more. Nobody questioned it because there was nothing to question. Step two, AI agents now do the actual work, not assist with, do. Finance, supply chain, procurement. Tasks that used to need a person, a login, and probably a second cup of coffee to get through now just happen. No name attached, no seat required. Step three, then this is the part that actually matters. The thing SAP was charging for isn't there anymore. Same output. Fewer humans in the loop, per seat pricing is standing there pointing at an empty chair. And here's what I think most people get wrong about this moment. It's not that SAP suddenly got bad at selling licenses. Their sales team didn't lose its touch overnight. It's that the licenses quietly stopped being connected to anything real. You can be great at selling something that no longer means what it used to. That's a much scarier problem than being bad at your job, because nobody inside the company necessarily did anything wrong. Klein just happened to be the one willing to say that part out loud. And here's exactly how he put it. It would be foolish to still charge subscription base. Read that again. That's about as close as a public company CEO gets to standing up and saying, the thing we've charged people for over 20 years doesn't actually work anymore, without triggering an emergency shareholder call and a very long night for the comms team. And honestly, credit where it's due. Most companies don't say this until the model has actually collapsed underneath them, until the earnings call where somebody finally asks the question nobody could avoid anymore. SAP said it while the stock was still falling, not after the obituary was written, while it was still happening in real time with everybody watching. That takes a specific kind of nerve, or maybe just the realization that pretending otherwise wasn't buying them anything. So, where does this actually show up first? Not everywhere at once. There are three places bleeding out before the rest. And those three things are finance, supply chain, and procurement. These are the workflows where the work is repeatable enough that an agent can just do it, not help with it, do it. Reconciliation, exception handling, sourcing, contracts, the part of the business that run on process more than judgment. The stuff that used to be a team, a shared drive, and a Tuesday status meeting nobody looked forward to. And notice what's not on that list. None of these are the sexy AI use cases. No chatbots, no co-pilots people screenshot and post on LinkedIn with a caption about the future of work. This is back office plumbing, unglamorous, invisible when it works, and exactly the kind of thing that never makes it into a keynote, which is precisely why it's the first place per seat pricing actually dies. Nobody's emotionally attached to a procurement license. Nobody's fighting to keep their reconciliation seat because it's part of their identity. There's no nostalgia in the back office, just a workflow that used to need five people and now needs one person watching an agent to do the other four jobs. That makes it the easiest place in the company to quietly stop charging for humans who aren't there anymore. So, if pricing has to change here, what else has to change with it? Client's answer: basically everything, not just pricing. Clients calling this a full reinvention. How the company pays people, how it engages customers, and how it makes money. All three at once, on purpose. That's the ambitious version of the plan, the one that sounds great in a Bloomberg interview. Here's the more honest version, though, the one that actually explains why they're doing all three at the same time instead of picking one and seeing how it goes. You can't change how you charge without changing what you're actually selling. And you can't change what you're selling without changing who's doing the selling and how they're getting paid to sell it. Try to do just the pricing part on its own, and you end up with a new number on an old invoice attached to a sales team still trained to sell the old thing. It doesn't hold together. So, this was never three separate initiatives that happened to land in the same year. It's one domino, not three. Pricing, product, and people all tip together, or none of them really move at all. And the clearest evidence they mean it isn't sitting on the pricing page, it's in who they're hiring. And that's hundreds of new employees on a brand new unit built entirely around AI adoption, deployed to build AI applications directly inside customer environments, not selling into them, sitting inside them, building alongside their teams. Here's the part worth actually sitting with, though, because it's easy to skim past as just another org chart headline. That's not how software companies usually operate. Software companies sell you a license, hand you a login, and wish you luck. Maybe throw in an onboarding call if you're lucky. Consulting firms are the ones who show up and build the thing with you in the room until it works. Two very different businesses historically. And SAP is deliberately becoming more of the second one. Why? Because if you're going to charge based on usage, the usage actually has to happen. There's no revenue in a product sitting there unused, no matter how good it is. Nobody consumes a product they're never figured out how to use. And under the old subscription model, that was fine. You got paid either way. Under consumption pricing, an unused product is just a bill nobody's paying. So SAP isn't hiring an army of forward deploying engineers out of generosity. They're doing it because their entire new revenue model depends on customers actually succeeding with the thing, not just buying it and letting it gather dust. Now, is SAP just improvising here, figuring it out as they go, or is this happening across the whole industry, whether companies want it or not? So let's zoom out a little bit. SAP really isn't alone in this. Everyone's pricing outcomes now, which either means SAP is following a trend or they just caught up to one. Judge for yourself. Look at the numbers though. Intercom charges 99 cents per resolved conversation. Zendesk is sitting around $1.75. Salesforce Agentforce is $2 a conversation. And a human agent doing that exact same job costs somewhere around $40 an interaction. Sit with that gap for a second because it's not subtle. That's not a modest efficiency story you'd bury in a footnote. That's the entire pitch in one comparison. Every single vendor pricing this way is making the exact same argument, just with different numbers. We cost a fraction of what human costs. So charge us like it, and everybody wins. And it is a genuinely persuasive pitch. It's clean, it's simple, it's the kind of math that gets a deal signed in one meeting, right up until the customer asks the follow up question. Prove the resolution actually counted. Prove that $1.99 conversion actually solved the problem and didn't just close the ticket and quietly hand the real issue back to a human 3 days later. That's where the pitch gets interesting. And to be clear, this isn't three companies independently doing something clever at the same time. It's the whole market moving at once, which tells you this was never really optional. This is market wide, not an SAP quirk, not a one off headline you'll forget by next quarter. The numbers: seat based pricing dropped from 21% to 15% of SaaS companies in 12 months. Say that out loud, and it doesn't really sound that dramatic. But think about what that actually means. That's not a handful of scrappy startups experimenting with something new. That's a meaningful slice of an entire industry looking at the model it's run on for decades and deciding within a single year that it's not worth defending anymore. And on the other side of the same 12 months, hybrid pricing jumped from 27% to 41%. Not a slow drift from one column to the other. A market visibly changing its mind in real time while everyone was still arguing about whether AI pricing was even a real conversation yet. For an industry this size, with this much revenue running through it, that's not evolution. That's basically overnight. And if you're hoping this settles down soon, sit back down because it doesn't. It gets bigger from here. By 2030, Gardner is projecting that more than 40% of enterprise SaaS spend shifts to usage, agent, or outcome based pricing. 4 years out, not someday, 4 years. So let's be clear about what this actually is. This isn't a 2026 news cycle you'll forget about the next time something shinier shows up. This is the new default quietly being built right now, while most companies are still deciding whether it's worth putting on a roadmap. And here's the uncomfortable part: most companies aren't going to help build that default. They're going to react to it once it's already standing there, fully formed, same as SAP is doing right now. SAP isn't ahead of this curve out of foresight. They're catching up to a wave that was already 40% of the way to the shore. Which brings us back to the actual question worth asking. Why did SAP move specifically when it did? Spoiler, nobody does this by choice. It wasn't a strategy choice. Let's be honest about what it actually was, though. It was a forced move made under a level of pressure most companies never have to face in public. Three things stacked up on top of each other: market cap pressure, a fifth of the company's value gone in a single year, with investors watching every earnings call for a sign this gets fixed. A new competitive set, and this is the part that should genuinely unsettle the company, like SAP. Anthropic and OpenAI aren't just AI vendors on the sidelines anymore. They're raising real, serious questions about whether traditional enterprise software even holds its position in the new world. And that's not a question SAP is used to fielding. And a narrowing window every single quarter, SAP stayed on the old model. The gap between what it was charging for and what the market actually expected got a little wider, a little harder to explain away. Nobody rewrites a 20-year-old pricing model on a whim on a Tuesday because it seemed like a good time. You do it because the alternative, staying still and hoping the pressure eases up on its own, is worse, much worse. But here's the thing about saying we fixed the pricing problem that's worth sitting with for a second. Saying it out loud doesn't actually mean the problem's fixed. Consumption pricing solves one problem and creates another. That's usually how these trades work. You rarely get to fix something without picking up a new headache in exchange. So here's what gets lost in the announcement. Subscriptions gave finance teams a number, one number, sitting still, that they could actually plan a budget around. Boring, predictable, and honestly, that's a feature, not a bug. Consumption pricing doesn't offer that, and it's not theoretical. Customers are already telling Bloomberg they're struggling to forecast spend now that costs move with usage instead of just sitting there with the seats quiet and unchanging, the way a bill is supposed to behave. So here's the actual trade SAP is asking customers to make. Give up the comfort of a predictable bill in exchange for a bill that's supposed to track the value you're actually getting. And look, that's a completely reasonable trade on paper. If the value is obvious, if you can see exactly what you're getting for what you're paying, most finance teams will take that deal happily. But if the value isn't obvious, if it's murky, if it's hard to point to, you haven't upgraded anything. You've just swapped a boring bill for a confusing one. And confusing is worse than boring every single time. And that's exactly the argument critics are making right now, pretty loudly. AI units price compute, customers buy outcomes. And that mismatch right there is where the real argument starts. So here's the sharpest version of the pushback, and it's a good one. Pricing AI on how much compute it burns instead of what it actually accomplishes quietly hands the customer a piece of homework they never signed up for. You open the invoice, and it's full of usage units clean, precise, technically accurate, and none of it draws a clear line to a result you actually care about. Nothing in finance wakes up excited to reconcile compute consumed against value delivered. That's not their job. That was supposed to be the vendor's job. And that's the gap underneath all of this, the one that doesn't get said out loud in the press release. Vendors understand their own infrastructure costs extremely well. They know exactly what a token costs, what a query costs, down to the decimal. Customers understand their own business outcomes extremely well. They know what a resolved ticket is worth, what a closed deal is worth, and what an hour of an employee's time is worth. Consumption pricing done properly needs both of these translated into the same language. And right now, most vendors have only bothered to build half of that translation. They built the side that's easy for them and left the customer to figure out the side that's hard. So, how do you actually fix that gap instead of just writing a strongly worded post about it? SAP's answer isn't a pricing tweak. It's not a new column on the invoice. It's underneath the pricing entirely. Because the thing is, consumption pricing only works if the underlying data can be trusted, full stop. That's not a nice to have, it's the whole foundation the model is standing on. Think about what you're actually asking a customer to believe when you switch them to outcome based pricing. You're asking them to trust that the number on their invoice accurately reflects what happened, that the system correctly identified the outcome, correctly counted it, correctly tied a dollar figure to it. If the data behind this is fragmented, inconsistent, or just plain wrong, the pricing model is built on a foundation that can't hold weight. It doesn't matter how elegant the pricing logic is on paper if the inputs feeding it are garbage. This is the reason the pricing announcement wasn't SAP's only move this year. And honestly, probably wasn't even the most important one. You can stand on stage and say, we charge for outcomes all you want. But that sentence is empty if your own systems can't reliably tell you what actually happened across the customer's environment. You'd just be billing people based on a guess and calling it precision. So SAP didn't just try to paper over that problem with a better dashboard or reassuring FAQ pages. They went and bought the fix. SAP went out and acquired Reltio. And if that name doesn't mean anything to you yet, it's about to matter a lot more than most of the announcements that actually made headlines this year. It's a cloud native master data management company, which sounds like the most boring possible thing to build a strategy around. And in a way, that's exactly the point. Its whole job is to take data scattered across SAP systems, non SAP systems, spreadsheets someone's been maintaining since 2014, all of it, and merge it into one consistent, trustworthy record. Using AI to actually sort out of the inconsistencies instead of just flagging them for someone to fix manually at 6 p.m. on a Friday. Once it's folded into SAP's business data cloud, it becomes the foundation underneath Joule and SAP's entire agent ecosystem. The layer nobody sees, but everything else depends on. It's the thing that's supposed to close the gap between an AI making a decision and that decision actually being grounded in something real. In plain terms, before you can charge customers for what your agents accomplish, your agents need to be working off information that isn't garbage. You can't build a billing model on top of a shrug. And if you skip that step, if you roll out consumption pricing before you've actually earned it, here's exactly how it goes wrong. Because the thing is, bad data breaks the whole pricing model. Not slows it down, not makes it a little less accurate, breaks it at the foundation in a way that no amount of clever pricing design can paper over. So here's how exactly that plays out step by step. Fragmented data across systems leads to agents acting on inconsistent inputs because an agent can only work with what it's given. And if what it's given contradicts itself depending on which system it's pulling from, that's what it's working with. Inconsistent inputs lead to unreliable outputs because there's no version of garbage in that reliably produces gold out, no matter how sophisticated the model sitting on top of it is. And unreliable outputs lead directly to consumption based costs nobody can actually justify anymore because now you're asking the customer to pay for a result and you can't confidently say the result is even correct. So here are the four steps. And the brutal part is each one doesn't just add to the last problem, it compounds it. By the time you're at step four, you're not looking at a small data quality issue anymore. You're looking at a pricing model with no legs underneath it. This is the actual thesis behind the Reltio deal, not the version that made it into the press release, but the real one. Pricing follows product architecture. You cannot charge someone for an outcome your own system can't reliably produce. That's not a clever pricing strategy dressed up in new language. That's a promise you haven't actually earned yet, no matter how confidently it's written on the invoice, which is why none of these moves make sense sitting on their own. So let's zoom out a little bit, look at all of it together, and you can start to see the real shape of the bet SAP is actually making. Because SAP isn't pulling one lever here, it's pulling three at the same time on purpose. And that's really the whole story, again, if you zoom all the way out. Pricing moving from per seat to AI consumption. Org moving from sales led to forward deployed engineering. Actual humans embedding inside customer environments. Data moving from fragmented to unified via Reltio, an unglamorous foundation holding the other two up. Three separate, genuinely difficult transformations, each one hard enough to be its own multi year initiative at most companies. And here's why that matters more than it might sound like at first. Change one of these alone, and it's a tweak. You roll it out, you write a release note, maybe a customer to ask a question in a QBR, and life goes on. Change all three in the same year, pricing, org, and data simultaneously, and it stops being a tweak entirely. It becomes a bet the entire company now has to survive. There's no quiet fallback here, no version of this where 6 months from now SAP just reverses course, blames a rough quarter, and goes back to the old model like nothing happened. The door is closing behind them as they walk through it. So, what do you actually take from all of this if you're SAP and you don't happen to have an acquisition budget lying around to go buy your own data quality problem away? Well, here's three lessons to consider. Lesson one, well, pricing follows product architecture, not the other way around. Say that one twice if you need to, because it's the single most useful thing in this entire episode. SAP didn't just start rewriting the price list and hoping the product would eventually justify it. That's the tempting shortcut. Change the number on the invoice, announce it confidently, and figure out the rest later. SAP did the harder, less exciting version instead. It rewrote what the product actually does first and let pricing catch up to that reality once it existed. The pricing change is downstream of the actual work, not a substitute for it. And here's why that order matters so much beyond just being the correct way to do it. If you're trying to change how you charge before you've changed what you're actually delivering, you are solving these two problems in exactly the wrong order. You end up with a shiny new pricing page sitting on top of the same old product, and customers can tell. They always can. You can't talk your way into a value story your product hasn't earned yet. No amount of clever messaging survives someone actually trying to use the thing. Moving on to lesson two, consumption pricing shifts accountability on outcomes you now have to actually prove. And this is the one thing that trips up a lot of companies who move fast on pricing side without thinking through what they just signed up for. Here's the thing nobody quite says out loud when they announce a shift like this. The second you move from charging for access to charging for usage or results, you've made a promise, whether you meant to or not. That promise is here's the line from what you paid to what you got. Clear, traceable, defensible. Under the old model, that line didn't really need to exist. You paid for a seat, you got a seat. Done. No further questions. Under this model, the line is the entire product. And if you can't actually show that line, if a customer looks at their bill and can't connect the dots between the number and the value, you haven't fixed the trust problem that was sitting underneath the old model. You've just picked it up and moved it somewhere less familiar, somewhere you haven't built the tooling to handle yet. Same problem, new address, and honestly, a less comfortable one to be stuck with. And last but not least, lesson three, incumbents can now move fast under real pressure. The constraint was never age, no matter how many times that excuse gets used in a strategy meeting. Think about what actually just happened here. A company older than most of its customers' parents, a company that's been doing business the same fundamental way since before the cloud even existed, just rewrote its pricing, its org chart, and its data strategy all in the same calendar year. Not over a 5 year transformation roadmap with a steering committee and a quarterly check in 1 year. That's not what big, slow incumbent is supposed to look like. And yet, here we are. So the next time someone tells you we're too big to move that fast, here's the honest translation of what that sentence actually means. It was never really about size. It was never about headcount or legacy systems or how many committees have to sign off on a decision. It was about whether anything was actually forcing the decision to happen. Companies don't move slowly because they're incapable of moving fast. They move slowly because nothing's making them do otherwise. SAP just got forced. And it turns out when you're actually forced, size stops being the excuse everyone thought it was. And that leaves one question nobody's actually answered yet. Will AI units just become the next per seat license? Because here's the uncomfortable possibility sitting underneath all of this optimism. What if this whole reinvention just swaps one confusing abstraction for another? Per seat pricing was at least simple, even if it stopped making sense. AI units could easily become a new pricing abstraction that's just as hard to predict and just as easy to resent as the thing it replaced. Except this time, nobody's actually built the tooling yet to make it make sense. No dashboard that clearly shows a customer what they're consuming and why. No clean translation between technical usage and business value. Just a new kind of confusing bill. That's the part worth actually watching over the next couple of quarters. Not the announcement. Announcements are easy. Everyone can hold a press conference. The follow through is the hard part, and the part that actually determines whether this was a genuine reinvention or just a rebrand of the same old problem. So let's pull this whole thing together. Here's the episode in 4 lines. If you remember nothing else from the last 20 minutes, remember these. 1. Per seat pricing breaks the moment agents do the work instead of humans. Not gradually, not eventually. The moment the work shifts, the pricing logic underneath it stops making sense. 2. SAP responded with 3 moves at once: pricing, org, data. Not one quiet adjustment they could roll back if it didn't land. A full commitment, not a pilot program. 3. Consumption pricing trades budget predictability for a value story vendors still have to actually prove. That trade isn't automatically a win, it's a bet. And the outcome depends entirely on whether the value side of that equation is real or just marketing. And 4, the one that matters most, honestly, the real signal here was never the announcement itself. Announcements are cheap. The real signal is whether the golden record bet, the Realtio acquisition, the unglamorous data work nobody wrote headlines about, whether that actually pays off. That's the part that decides if any of this was real. If you're building or running a SaaS company right now, This isn't background noise happening to somebody else's industry. It's the preview. You're just watching it happen to SAP first. All right, so that's the episode for today. We'll call that the autopsy into SAP's shift into AI. We didn't focus on SAP because SAP has it all figured out. Genuinely, again, ask us in a year, and this whole story might read completely different. Maybe the golden record bet doesn't pay off. Maybe AI units really does become the thing that everyone resents in 18 months. We don't know yet, and honestly, neither does SAP, no matter how confident that Bloomberg interview sounded. But here's what's actually worth respecting about this one. They were willing to do the hard, unglamorous, three things at once version of a change. Not the easy version, not a rebrand, not a new tagline, not a slide deck about AI first thinking with the same product underneath it. The real version. Pricing, org, data all at once, out loud, while the stock was still falling and everyone was watching. Most companies wait until they're forced into a corner and then do it quietly, hoping nobody sees. SAP did it in public, mid fall, with a camera on them. That takes something most companies don't have. Not brilliance necessarily, just nerve. So, if you got something out of this episode and this autopsy that we did on SAP, there's going to be a lot where that came from on this channel. Sometimes we do a deep dive into companies like SAP to really kind of show the story behind the headlines. And other times we get into more operational stuff like playbooks and tools and things like that. So if you are new to the channel, please do subscribe so you don't miss a future video. And of course, it does help us grow. We are relatively new, so any help you can give us, that would be amazing. The other thing too is we want to build a community here. We have some things in the works. Um, but certainly to start that off, if you have any comments on what we could do better, anything, any commentary on the moves SAP is making, and if you've seen these in other companies, certainly leave a comment below. We do read all of them here, and it does guide our content moving ahead. Uh, so I appreciate you all watching, and please do head over to our LinkedIn page as well. We are trying to prop that up in addition to this channel here on YouTube. So again, I appreciate the time spent on going through this, whether you're an operator, a founder, or an investor, or somebody who's been in SaaS for a long time. I hope this resonated. That's the episode, and we'll see you in the next one.